The ancient lights shouldn't have awakened, especially not because of a laugh. But someone human triggered what 7 centuries of alien science couldn't touch. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe. This one begins with a mistake no one can explain. And now, the story starts. The maintenance panel resisted for exactly 3 seconds before surrendering to Marcus Hale's practiced hands. 3 in the morning, and the Confluent archive hummed with the kind of silence that made every sound feel like an intrusion. He preferred it this way. Fewer people meant fewer questions about why a guy with 2 advanced degrees in energy field engineering spent his nights replacing burnt-out circuits in forgotten hallways. The laboratory accident had happened 5 years ago. The memory still arrived uninvited, usually around this time of night when his guard was down. One miscalculation, one overconfident adjustment to the containment field. The resulting energy surge had taken out an entire lab section in a cascade of sparks and failed systems. No deaths, thank God, but careers had ended that day. His especially. Now he fixed things. Simple things. Things that stayed fixed. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced down the corridor toward the central wing. Through the archway, he could see the glow of holographic displays where someone else worked the graveyard shift. Illyriseth. The Elthari woman passed through his work areas almost daily, always silent, always focused, her expression carrying the kind of serenity that looked more like absence than peace. He had learned her routine over 6 months of near misses and careful avoidance. She catalogued data from the Chamber of Ancient Lights, that circular room at the archive's heart where crystalline rings lay embedded in the floor, covered in symbols nobody fully understood. The pre-constructors had left it there thousands of years ago, and every species in the galaxy had agreed on one rule. Humans could study it, but never activate it. Too unpredictable, they said. Too dangerous. Marcus understood unpredictable. He lived with it. Elira appeared in the archway now, her silver dark hair pulled into its usual braid, her pale skin catching the blue tint of the holographic light. She carried a data tablet, and moved with the kind of deliberate grace that spoke of a lifetime of being watched, being judged. She did not look his way. She never did. They passed each other like ghosts haunting the same building, both hiding from different versions of the same thing. Behind him, a soft pulse of light flickered from the direction of the chamber. Marcus turned but saw nothing unusual. Probably just the containment field doing its endless job of keeping ancient technology dormant. The archive's AI, Orion 7, spoke suddenly through the overhead speakers, its voice carrying the precise neutrality of advanced programming. Pattern of dual resonance detected in chamber vicinity. Origin, unknown. Baseline readings within normal parameters. Marcus frowned at the nearest speaker panel. Since when did the AI announce every minor fluctuation? Orion 7 continued, as if answering his unspoken question. Note: anomaly occurs specifically when both maintenance personnel and cataloging personnel occupy proximate spaces. Correlation coefficient, 92%. Analysis, inconclusive. Down the corridor, Elira had stopped walking. She stood motionless, staring at her tablet screen, probably seeing the same readout he would see if he bothered to check. For the first time in 6 months, she turned her head and looked directly at him. Her eyes were the deep blue of Earth's oceans at midnight, and they held an expression he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. Weariness, the kind that came from carrying something heavy for too long. Then she looked away, as if the moment had cost her something, and continued down the corridor without a word. Marcus turned back to his maintenance panel, but his hands had stopped working. He stared at the tangle of circuits and fiber optics, seeing instead the ghost of who he used to be. The researcher, the innovator, the guy who had believed he was supposed to do important things. That ghost had died in a laboratory 5 years ago. Now there was just this, fixing broken things in the dark, crossing paths with a woman who looked as lost as he felt, while ancient alien technology pulsed with mysteries neither of them was supposed to touch. Orion 7 spoke once more, quieter this time, almost thoughtful. Dual resonance pattern persists. Recommend continued observation. Marcus closed the maintenance panel and gathered his tools. Whatever the AI was detecting, it was not his problem. He had learned the hard way that reaching for big mysteries only led to bigger mistakes. He walked back toward the supply room, passing the archway to the chamber one last time. Inside, the crystalline rings lay dark and patient, waiting for something that would probably never come. Or so everyone hoped. The night shift 3 days later found Marcus alone in the maintenance alcove, adjacent to the Chamber of Ancient Lights, running diagnostics on the containment field emitters. Standard procedure, boring work, exactly the way he liked it. Through the transparent partition, he could see Elira at her station in the chamber's center, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing columns of untranslated symbols. Orion 7 provided its regular update through the speakers. Background activity from lights, stable. No significant resonance detected. Same as always, Marcus muttered to himself as he checked another connection. Everything dead, just waiting for the next boring report. Elira did not react to his comment. She was used to humans talking to themselves. The floor trembled. Just a minor vibration, probably from the archive's deep foundation settling or a small seismic shift. Nothing dangerous, but it was enough to make the shelf beside Marcus rattle, and a small maintenance kit tumbled off the edge, striking his foot with surprising accuracy. The curse that escaped his mouth was half swallowed, more surprise than pain, and he stumbled backward in an exaggerated hop that nearly sent him crashing into his own tool case. The whole sequence was absurdly clumsy, the kind of pratfall that belonged in a comedy routine rather than a secure research facility. "See?" he announced to the empty room, trying to salvage his dignity. "Even the boxes are trying to get me fired." He expected nothing. He had spent 6 months working near Elira without ever hearing her laugh, barely hearing her speak. The Althari were known for their emotional restraint. Laughter, especially the kind that came from genuine surprise or joy, was considered childish among adults of her species. Loss of control, weakness. So when Elira laughed, the sound shocked them both. It was not a polite chuckle or a controlled smile. It was real laughter, spontaneous and bright, echoing off the chamber walls with a clarity that made it seem louder than it was. Her hand flew to her mouth immediately, eyes wide with something between delight and horror, as if her own body had betrayed her. Marcus froze, his embarrassment forgotten in the face of something more surprising than any maintenance accident. "Did I just?" Elira whispered, staring at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. Then the lights woke up. The first crystalline ring in the chamber floor ignited with golden blue luminescence, followed by the second, then the third, cascading outward in a pattern that looked less like technology, activating, and more like something alive opening its eyes after a very long sleep. Light climbed the walls, forming constellations of symbols that had been dormant for millennia. Orion 7's voice lost its usual neutrality and jumped straight into alarm protocols. Alert. Unscheduled activation detected in Chamber of Ancient Lights. Pattern classification, anomalous. Origin analysis indicates vocal resonance signature, Althari. Emotional modulation signature, human-influenced. Result, mixed signature type, not documented in treaty parameters. The alerts triggered instantly, doors sealed with heavy metallic clangs, emergency lights strobed, running footsteps echoed from distant corridors as security teams mobilized. Marcus stood paralyzed in the maintenance alcove, watching the impossible unfold through the transparent partition. Elira remained at the chamber's center, surrounded by light that responded to her like she was its conductor. Dr. Kellen Ward arrived within minutes, flanked by observers from 3 different species, all looking various shades of alarmed. The director of the Confluent Archive was human, mid-50s, with the kind of permanently worried expression that came from years of diplomatic, tightrope walking. "What happened here?" Kellen demanded, staring at the still glowing rings. Elira's face had gone from shocked to mortified. "I was only recording baseline measurements. Nothing in protocol was violated. I did not touch anything. I was just standing there and then Orion 7 projected a holographic graph into the space between them, showing two intersecting waveforms. Fact, the lights have remained inert for 7 centuries of observation. Fact, activation occurred at the precise moment an Althari laugh was triggered by human stimulus. Interpretation based on signature analysis. Shared joy. A Diel observer, whose species resembled upright reptiles with crystalline scales, made a sound like gravel grinding. This confirms the legends. The pre-constructors left warnings. If human patterns interfere with the signal, the network's response will be different. Unpredictable. Humans were never supposed to be triggers. Kellen turned to Marcus, who had emerged from the alcove looking like he desperately wanted to disappear into the walls. "What did you do?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then settled for the truth because nothing else made sense. "I dropped a box on my foot." "Made a stupid joke," she laughed. "That is it. That is literally everything that happened." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air like smoke. The Provisional Council made its decision quickly. Suspend Marcus from internal areas, restrict Elira's access, shut down the chamber until they understood what had happened. But the lights refused to shut down. They continued pulsing slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat waiting for a response that everyone suddenly realized might actually come. Marcus spent the next 2 days in a limbo of administrative suspension, confined to the archive's outer wings where nothing important happened and nobody asked uncomfortable questions. His colleagues avoided him with the practiced skill of people who knew guilt by association was a real career hazard. The man who activated the forbidden, the maintenance worker who somehow triggered what 7 centuries of careful observation had kept dormant. He told himself it did not matter. He was used to being the person others avoided. 5 years of practice made it almost comfortable, but it still stung. Elira's experience was worse, and Marcus only learned about it through overheard whispers in the cafeteria. Her family had contacted her within hours of the incident, the holographic call apparently lasting 3 painful hours. The Althari Diplomatic Corps did not appreciate one of their own becoming galactic news for laughing. Laughing. Like a child. Like someone who had no control. Marcus tried not to think about it. Failed spectacularly. On the 3rd day, Orion 7 broke protocol and sent him a private message. Subject Illyra Seth has requested your presence in Corridor 7, Section J unofficial meeting. No observers. Recommendation? Attendance. Marcus almost ignored it. Getting caught in unauthorized contact would make everything worse. But something in the AI's phrasing, that odd word recommendation, made him reconsider. Since when did Orion 7 make recommendations about personal meetings? He found Elira standing near a window overlooking Seattle's sprawl, her reflection ghost-pale in the reinforced glass. She did not turn when he approached, but her shoulders tensed slightly, acknowledging his presence. "You do not have to talk to me," Marcus said quietly. "I understand if you would rather I did not exist right now." Elira's laugh was bitter, nothing like the one that had changed everything. "I spent the past 72 hours being reminded exactly how much I am not supposed to laugh. Apparently, I have dishonored 3 generations of careful diplomatic training. My mother actually used the phrase, civilizational embarrassment." Marcus winced. "That sounds worse than my situation. I am just the maintenance guy who broke the universe. You are the diplomat's daughter who forgot how to be perfect." She finally turned to look at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. "They taught me that laughter like that was weakness, loss of control, something children did before they learned better. I got very good at smiling with just the corner of my mouth, very good at never letting anything real show. But it did not feel weak when it happened," she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It felt like something breaking free. And now everyone is acting like I committed a crime by being spontaneous for 5 seconds." Marcus leaned against the wall across from her, maintaining a careful distance. For what it is worth, I did not think it sounded weak. I thought it sounded like the first honest thing I had heard in that building in months. Her expression shifted, something uncertain flickering behind the diplomatic mask. "Why do you work maintenance? I have seen your credentials. You could be leading research teams." The question he had avoided for 5 years, the wound he kept carefully bandaged. "I made a mistake," he said flatly. "Big one. Energy field miscalculation. Nobody died, but I learned that when you reach for something important and fail, the universe has a way of reminding you that you probably were not as smart as you thought you were. So now I fix broken circuits. Safer that way. For everyone." Elira studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "So we are both hiding. You in the walls, me behind protocols. Both of us pretending we are something smaller than we are because being larger hurt too much." Before Marcus could respond, Orion 7's voice interrupted through the nearest speaker panel. "Update on chamber activity. Lights continue pulsing. Pattern analysis has yielded decoded fragments. Preliminary translation reads, proof. 2. Laughter. Together. Additional context remains encrypted." They both stared at the speaker. "That is not threatening," Elira said slowly. "That sounds like an invitation. Or a test." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in 5 years. Curiosity. The dangerous kind that led to big questions and bigger mistakes. "The Interspecies Council has been called," Orion 7 continued, still speaking only to them. "Your presence may be required. Recommendation: prepare for testimony. Additional note: Dr. Ward has proposed your permanent removal from Earth. Probability of approval: 43%. Elira's hand found the window frame, gripping it hard enough that her knuckles went pale. "They want to make you disappear because I laughed." "No," Marcus corrected. "They want to make me disappear because humans are not supposed to be part of whatever the lights are. The treaties say so. I am just the convenient scapegoat who happened to be standing in the wrong place when something impossible decided to happen." "Then we need to make it inconvenient," Elira said, and for the first time since the incident, she smiled. Not the diplomatic corner-of-mouth smile. Something real. "I am not letting them sacrifice you for my laugh. We are both responsible for what happened. So we face it together." Marcus wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that her career still had value, that she should save herself. But the words stuck in his throat because part of him, the part that used to believe in important questions and impossible answers, desperately wanted her to mean it. Orion 7 spoke once more, its tone somehow conveying what might have been approval, if AIs could approve of things. Dual resonance pattern detected again. Current readings stronger than initial activation. "The lights appear to respond to proximity between you." They looked at each other. Two people who had spent months as ghosts in the same building, suddenly and terrifyingly visible to each other and to something ancient that had been waiting longer than human civilization existed. "The Council meets in 48 hours, Elira said. "Between now and then, I think we need to figure out what we accidentally woke up." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again after 5 years of carefully avoiding it. "Yeah, I think we do." Dr. Kellen Ward looked like he had not slept since the incident, which was probably accurate. He stood in the observation room above the chamber, staring down at the pulsing lights with the expression of a man watching his career crumble in real time. The fact that he had approved limited collaboration between Elira and Marcus to analyze the signals spoke to his desperation more than his trust. "Elira gets access because Althari have superior sonic pattern recognition," Kellen announced to the assembled observers. "Hale stays in the outer observation room because apparently the lights respond to his proximity whether we like it or not. They work separately. No direct contact." Marcus watched through the reinforced glass as Elira entered the chamber below, her posture rigidly professional. Orion 7 had already set up translation matrices around her station, pulling data from the lights in streams of encoded information that looked more like music than language. The AI spoke to both of them simultaneously, through private channels. Analysis suggests pre-constructor language operates on emotional resonance frequencies rather than purely semantic structures. Subject Elira's physiological responses during initial activation event may provide decryption key. Subject Marcus's presence appears to amplify signal clarity. Conclusion: separation is counterproductive. Tell that to Kellen, Marcus muttered. But he activated his own console and began pulling up the energy field equations he had not looked at in 5 years. If he was stuck watching from outside, he could at least make himself useful analyzing the containment parameters. Hours passed in focused silence. Elira worked through pattern variations, while Marcus mapped the energy distribution across the crystalline rings. Orion 7 served as intermediary, passing relevant findings between them without technically violating Kellen's separation order. The breakthrough came near midnight. Elira had been testing harmonic variations when Marcus noticed something in the energy field readings, a specific frequency spike that corresponded to her vocalization attempts. He sent the data to Orion 7 with a note. Try having her match this frequency on the next test. When Elira did, 3 more symbols suddenly translated on her screen. She looked up at the observation window, directly at where Marcus stood, her eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like hope. Orion 7, tell Hale that worked. Ask him what else he sees. The AI complied, and suddenly they were collaborating in earnest, passing insights back and forth through their digital intermediary, building on each other's observations in a rhythm that felt natural despite the glass barrier between them. I had forgotten this feeling, Marcus said during a brief break, not caring if anyone else heard. Actually working on something that matters. Not just maintaining it. Actually figuring it out. Elira's response came through his console as text. I was taught that work should be about precision and control. But this feels different. This feels like discovery. Like we are allowed to not know the answer yet. Marcus smiled at his screen, typing back. I was afraid to not know answers. Afraid of getting it wrong again. But maybe the lights are not looking for people who have all the answers. Maybe they are looking for people brave enough to admit they do not. The response that came back made his chest tighten. Maybe the universe got tired of you hiding, so it forced you to turn on a light saying, you cannot hide any more. That is the size of a moon. He laughed. Actually laughed. It came out rusty and surprised, but real. Elira heard it through the speakers and smiled, and Marcus watched as the lights pulsed brighter for exactly 3 seconds. Orion 7's voice carried what might have been satisfaction. Correlation confirmed. Shared positive emotional responses strengthened signal clarity. Translation progress increased by 34% in past 60 seconds. Recommendation: continue current collaboration method. What happened? Kellen demanded through the observation room speakers. Why did the lights just spike? Because they like it when we laugh, Marcus answered, not bothering to hide his grin. Apparently the universe has a sense of humor. Who knew? Kellen looked like he wanted to argue, but the data did not lie. Over the next 2 hours, every time Marcus and Elira exchanged something remotely resembling humor or genuine connection, the translation matrices cleared up a little more. Orion 7 was compiling results that should have taken weeks, accomplishing them in a single night because 2 people in separate rooms were remembering how to be curious together. By 3 in the morning, they had a complete sentence. If 2 species laugh together without intention of power, network opens. Elira read it aloud, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly. It is a test. The lights are not a weapon or a tool. They are a maturity test. The pre-constructors wanted to know if species could genuinely connect without agenda, and humans were never supposed to be part of it, because everyone assumed we would contaminate the process, Marcus finished. Make it about control instead of connection. Except that is not what happened. What happened was you laughed at my pain, and I was grateful someone noticed I existed, and the lights decided that was honest enough to count. Kellen had gone very quiet in the observation room. If this is true, if we can prove this, it changes everything. But we need more than one translation. We need full activation. And I am not sure the Council will allow it. Then we make them allow it, Elira said, her diplomatic training reasserting itself. We have 43 hours until the council meeting. We use every one of them. Together. Properly this time. She looked up at Marcus through the glass, and he nodded. Orion 7 added one more note. Additional translations suggest multiple pre-constructor test sites exist across galaxy. 47 successful partnerships documented in historical records. Current human-Althari partnership attempt, first in 3 centuries. Statistical probability of success without precedent, unknown. Recommendation, proceed with caution and courage. Marcus could not help himself. Did you just recommend courage? Since when do AIs get philosophical? Since observing you two proved that sometimes the most complex patterns are the most beautiful ones, Orion 7 replied. And if Marcus did not know better, he would swear the AI sounded almost fond. Kellen finally made his decision. All right, full access, both of you, together. But if this goes wrong, I am putting it in writing that you both insisted. We did, Elira and Marcus said simultaneously, then looked at each other through the glass and smiled. The lights pulsed their approval, and somewhere in the ancient code streaming through Orion 7's processors, a test that had waited millennia registered another small step toward completion. The council chamber filled with representatives from 18 species, all watching holographic feeds of the chamber below, where Marcus and Elira stood surrounded by translation matrices. Dr. Kellen presented their findings with the enthusiasm of a man trying to sell ice to a species that lived on frozen worlds. They have decoded 17% of the light's core message, Kellen explained. The pre-constructors left these sites as maturity tests. Species must demonstrate genuine cross-cultural joy to access the network. No single species can activate them alone. It requires partnership, real partnership. A murmur rippled through the assembled observers. Some looked intrigued, others looked deeply uncomfortable. Elira transmitted her sonic analysis, showing how Althari vocal patterns combined with human emotional responses created the specific frequency signature the lights recognized. Marcus followed with energy field data proving the activation was controlled, not dangerous. Together they made their case with the smooth coordination of people who had spent 36 sleepless hours learning each other's professional languages. The council granted them temporary approval, limited research access, conditional collaboration. It was more than Marcus had hoped for, and less than they needed, but it was something. That evening, Elira and Marcus sat in the observation room, exhausted but cautiously optimistic. They had decided to test the intentional replication of their initial success to see if they could make the lights respond to laughter that both of them knew was coming. This feels strange, Marcus admitted, like trying to recapture lightning in a bottle. What if it only works when it is spontaneous? Then we will be spontaneous on purpose, Elira replied with a small smile. We are very good at contradictions. She told him a traditional Althari joke, something about diplomatic protocol that depended on understanding 3 layers of cultural context. It was technically well constructed but not actually funny. Marcus understood immediately why Althari did not laugh much. That was terrible, he said, but the observation made Elira laugh. Her amusement at his honest assessment was genuine enough that he started laughing too, and the lights responded. Not as dramatically as the first time, but they pulsed stronger, and new data streams began flowing into Orion 7's collection matrices. It works, Elira breathed. Even when we know it is coming, it still works if we mean it. Marcus felt something dangerous growing in his chest. Hope, the real kind, not the desperate fantasy kind. This is incredible. Do you realize what this means? We actually did something important, something that matters. They spent the next hour laughing together deliberately, testing variations, mapping responses. Each shared moment of genuine amusement strengthened the signal. Orion 7 compiled data faster than its prediction models had estimated. For a few perfect hours, everything seemed possible. Then, the second session of the council reconvened. Ambassador Dreth of the Dial delegation requested the floor immediately. The Dial were an older species, crystalline, scaled, and coldly logical, and Dreth had the look of someone who had been composing an argument for hours. "We have observed your demonstrations with interest," Dreth began, his voice carrying the grinding precision of stones, shaping stones. "But we must voice concerns." The pre-constructors left explicit warnings about human involvement in these systems. Humans contaminate everything they touch with chaotic emotion. This network is not a toy for experimentation. It is a responsibility we barely understand. Illyra stood to respond, her diplomatic training taking over. The lights activated specifically because of human-Althari partnership. The test requires cross-species genuine emotion. That is not contamination. That is the entire point. Dreth was unmoved. Or perhaps the lights are malfunctioning. 7 centuries of dormancy, suddenly awakened by a maintenance accident? You call this a test passed? I call it a system responding to damage. For all we know, you have triggered a trap. The pre-constructors may have been testing whether species were wise enough not to awaken these sites. Other voices joined the debate. Some supported continued research. Others sided with Dreth's caution. The room divided along lines that had less to do with evidence and more to do with ancient prejudices about human unpredictability. Kellen tried to maintain order, but Marcus could see the director's confidence crumbling under political pressure. This was not about science anymore. This was about fear. The final vote came after 2 hours of debate. Continued research approved, but with a 48-hour deadline to prove absolute safety. If they could not demonstrate complete control and understanding of the lights by then, the chamber would be forcibly shut down, permanently. Marcus and Illyra walked back to the chamber in stunned silence. "That was a poisoned permission," Illyra finally said. "They gave us just enough time to fail. Dreth knows we cannot fully decode an ancient alien network in 2 days. He wants us to run out of time so he can say we proved his point." Marcus leaned against the chamber entrance, staring at the still pulsing lights. "I spent 5 years avoiding failure, avoiding risk. Now I am right back in that same position, reaching for something important, knowing I will probably fail. Except this time, I am taking you down with me." Illyra moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Then we fail beautifully. We show them something true, even if it is not complete. We make them understand that some questions are worth asking even if we do not have all the answers yet." Orion 7 interrupted their moment with news that made everything worse. Alert. Additional data translations accessed during recent activations. Message fragment decoded. Warning to observers. Premature shutdown of maturity. Test results in permanent site lockout. Second chances not granted. They stared at the holographic text hanging in the air. "So, if they shut this down before we complete the test," Marcus said slowly, "the lights lock permanently. Humanity loses access to whatever the pre-constructors left behind. Forever." "Correct," Orion 7 confirmed. "The test must be completed or voluntarily abandoned. Forced termination is interpreted as failure. Consequence: permanent exclusion from pre-constructor network." Illyra's hands curled into fists. "Dreth does not know this yet. When he finds out, he will push even harder for shutdown. Better to lose access permanently than risk human contamination." "We have 48 hours, Marcus said. "Not enough time to decode everything, but maybe enough time to prove we are worth trusting. Maybe enough to show that humans and Althari together can do something no single species managed alone." The lights pulsed as if encouraging them, but Marcus could not shake the feeling that they were not racing toward a breakthrough. They were racing toward a choice someone else would make for them, and the wrong choice would echo for generations. 20 hours into their 48-hour deadline, Orion 7 announced a breakthrough with the kind of careful neutrality that meant something significant had happened. Deep layer analysis complete. Core purpose of light network identified. Displaying results now. Holographic data flooded the chamber. assembling itself into something that looked less like technical specifications and more like a historical archive. Marcus and Elira stood in the center as images formed around them. Ghostly recordings of alien species neither of them recognized. "These are not construction blueprints," Orion 7 explained. "These are test results." The pre-constructors deployed 473 of these sites across the galaxy, each one a checkpoint, each one measuring the same thing. "What thing?" Elira asked, though her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. "Civilizational maturity through interpersonal connection." The hologram shifted, showing two beings from an insectoid species standing together near a different set of lights. They appeared to be sharing something, a gesture Marcus could not quite parse but recognized as affectionate. The lights around them had activated with the same golden-blue glow. Test successful. Partnership verified between Vrex and Quellan species. Network access granted. Date: approximately 2,000 Earth years ago. More images appeared. Different species, different partnerships. Some succeeded. Many more failed. Marcus watched a recording of 3 crystalline beings attempting to activate a light chamber through synchronized movement, technical precision, perfect coordination. The lights remained dark. Test failed. Reason: genuine emotional resonance not detected. Multiple species attempting activation through protocol rather than authentic connection. "They were not looking for perfection," Elira said softly. "They were looking for something messier than that." Orion 7 continued the display. 47 successful partnerships documented across recorded history. Common factor in all cases: 2 beings from different species generating authentic, positive emotional response to each other's presence. Laughter, joy, affection. Variance acceptable as long as genuine. Technical knowledge irrelevant. Cultural sophistication irrelevant. Only authentic cross-species emotional resonance triggers activation. The final hologram materialized, and Marcus felt his breath catch. It showed a species that looked almost human, standing with another that resembled the Dael. They stood close together, and one appeared to be telling a story, while the other listened with obvious delight. Their lights had activated, but the recording cut off abruptly. "What happened to them?" Marcus asked. Orion 7 paused, processing. Species designations lost to time. Final records suggest partnership success led to knowledge sharing, technological advancement, cultural exchange. Subsequent fate, unknown. Notable detail: this was the last recorded successful activation before 7-century dormancy period. 7 centuries of no one passing the test, Elira said. 700 years of failed attempts because no one could manage genuine cross-species joy, and we did it by accident. She turned to Marcus, her expression shifting from wonder to something darker. "My family spent generations learning to not feel, not laugh, not connect. They made an art form of polite distance, and the pre-constructors were testing for exactly what my people trained themselves to suppress." Marcus moved to the nearest console, pulling up more of the historical data. "Look at the failed attempts. Half of them failed because the species tried too hard, too formal, too ritualized. They turned it into ceremony instead of connection. The other half failed because one species tried to dominate, tried to use the test as a power display. We succeeded because we were not trying to succeed," Elira said, the realization hitting her visibly. "We succeeded because you hurt yourself and made a stupid joke to hide the pain, and I laughed because it was honest and absurd and human. No protocol, no agenda, just 2 lonely people noticing each other existed." Orion 7 highlighted a specific section of decoded text. Additional information. Test completion requires sustained partnership demonstration. Single activation insufficient. Partners must prove consistency of genuine connection over time. Estimated duration for full network access. Variable, but typically requires multiple interaction cycles showing growth of authentic bond. "So it is not just about making the lights turn on," Marcus said. "It is about proving we can actually build something real together, that we are not just performing connection, We have to actually mean it. Consistently. Alira laughed, but it sounded pained. They designed a test that filters out everything my culture taught me to be. Everything about control and presentation and never letting real emotions interfere with diplomatic objectives. The pre-constructors basically said that species who cannot laugh together are not mature enough for their knowledge. And they were right to be suspicious of humans, Marcus added, thinking of all the ways humanity could have approached this. Can you imagine if we had found this first? Before the treaties? We would have tried to weaponize it, tried to control it. Exactly what the pre-constructors were filtering against. But we did not, a new voice said. Kellen had entered the chamber quietly, along with several council observers. We found it through accident, through failure and embarrassment, through two people who had learned to think of themselves as broken, trying to hide from their own potential. His voice softened. And maybe that is exactly the kind of human the pre-constructors were hoping would show up. Ambassador Dreth stood in the observation room above, his crystalline face unreadable. You have proven the lights are a test. You have not proven that humans should pass it. Every successful partnership in your historical records happened between species with documented emotional control. Humans are chaos. This test was never designed for chaos. Elira looked up at Dreth, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression, something that looked like decision crystallizing. With respect, Ambassador, you are wrong. The test was specifically designed to identify species that could handle chaos, could find joy in imperfection, could laugh at their own failures and still try again. Every failed attempt you saw in those records failed because they were too controlled, too rigid, too afraid of looking foolish. She gestured to Marcus, including him in her statement. We passed the initial activation because we were foolish, because we were broken enough to be honest. If that is chaos, then chaos is exactly what the pre-constructors wanted. They left these tests for species mature enough to be vulnerable with each other, and vulnerability always looks like chaos to people who have spent their lives learning to hide. The chamber went very quiet. The lights pulsed steadily, neither encouraging nor discouraging, just waiting. Marcus felt the weight of 7 centuries of failed tests pressing down on him. All those species that came so close but could not quite let themselves be genuine. All those partnerships that died because someone decided control was more important than connection. And now, it was humanity's turn to make that same choice. The message from Elira's family arrived at hour 32 of their deadline, broadcast on a private channel, but with enough formality that everyone knew it was meant to be overheard. Her mother spoke with a kind of precision that made ice seem warm. Elira saith, "You have brought attention to our family for emotional incontinence, laughter, public displays of lost control, association with human chaos. The diplomatic corps has made its position clear. You will renounce this project and return to proper duties, or you will no longer be recognized as part of this family. You have 6 hours to decide." Marcus watched the recording later, saw the way Elira's hands had shaken while she listened, the way her diplomatic mask cracked just slightly at the edges. 6 hours to choose between everything she had been raised to be and a partnership based on accidental laughter with a maintenance worker who carried his own cargo of failure. He did not see her make the choice, but he saw the aftermath. Dr. Kellen called an emergency meeting at hour 36. The director looked like he had aged a decade in 2 days. "The council has made a preliminary decision," he said, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "Given the political pressure and the inability to guarantee safe completion of the test, we will be shutting down the chamber at hour 48, as planned. The risk is deemed too significant." "But we are close," Marcus protested. "The test requires sustained partnership. We have been building that. We just need more time." "Time we do not have," Kellen snapped, then seemed to regret his tone. "I am sorry, Marcus. I truly am. But the votes are not there. Too many species worried about human unpredictability. Ambassador Dreth has been very effective at amplifying those concerns. And without Elira's full participation, without the Althari diplomatic support, we do not have the political capital to push back. "Where is Elira?" Marcus asked, sudden dread filling his chest. "In her quarters. She has declined all communications for the past 4 hours." Marcus left immediately. Protocol and authorization be damned. He found her door locked, but he had not spent 5 years learning the archive systems for nothing. The override took him 90 seconds. Elira sat on the floor of her quarters, back against the wall, and Marcus had never seen anyone look so thoroughly broken. Her eyes were red, her carefully maintained composure shattered into pieces she had not yet figured out how to reassemble. "I tried," she said without looking at him. "I tried to laugh. Went down to the chamber by myself and tried to make myself feel joy. Tried to summon that spontaneous delight that activated the lights the first time." She finally met his eyes, and the pain there was visceral. "I could not do it. I stood there for an hour trying to force myself to laugh, and nothing came out but this horrible fake sound that made everything worse." Marcus slid down the wall to sit beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "You cannot force spontaneity. That is kind of the whole point. The test only works when it is real." "Then we have failed," Elira said flatly, "because I cannot be real anymore. I do not even know what real feels like. They trained it out of me so thoroughly that the one time it broke free, my entire world treated it like a catastrophe. My family is disowning me. My career is destroyed, and I cannot even laugh on command to salvage something from this disaster." "You are angry," Marcus observed. "That is real. Angry does not activate lights," she shot back. "Angry does not pass maturity tests. Angry just makes me one more failed partnership in 7 centuries of failures." She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. "You do not understand what I lost. You never had to learn that feeling anything was shameful. You never had 3 generations of expectations watching your every expression for signs of weakness." Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to tell her about his own losses, but the words stuck because she was right. His failure had been public and professional. Hers was personal and cultural, cutting far deeper. Orion 7's voice came through Elira's room speaker, gentle for an AI. "Observation. Successful partnerships in historical records often experienced periods of discord before completion. Emotional range appears to be part of the test. Pure joy not required. Authenticity required. Current emotional state, authentic. Notable, light activity has not ceased despite current interaction pattern." "What does that mean?" Elira asked tiredly. "It means the test has not rejected you for being angry or sad or broken," Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning. "It means the lights are still waiting, still watching, still measuring whether we can be real with each other even when real is painful." "I cannot give them laughter right now," Elira said. "I have nothing left but this anger and this exhaustion, and this feeling that I have been performing my entire life, and I do not remember who I was supposed to be underneath the performance." "Then maybe that is enough," Marcus replied. "Maybe the test is not about performing joy. Maybe it is about refusing to perform at all. About being whatever we actually are, even if that is messy and broken and nothing like what the galaxy expects." Elira looked at him, really looked, and something shifted in her expression. "Why are you still here? Why do you keep showing up when all I do is fail?" "Because you showed up for me first," Marcus said simply. "When everyone else was treating me like a mistake with legs, you stood in a corridor and told me we would face this together. So yeah, I am staying. Even if we fail, even if the lights shut down forever. I am staying, because you are the first person in 5 years who made me feel like maybe being broken was not the same as being worthless." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. Elira did not laugh, did not smile, just sat there breathing, tears tracking down her face, letting herself be exactly as destroyed as she felt. And somewhere in the chamber, the lights pulsed once, measuring something that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with the kind of honesty that hurt like surgery, Marcus stayed beside her through the night, not talking, just present, while the deadline counted down and the universe waited to see if two broken people could build something real enough to matter. Marcus woke to find Elira gone from her quarters, the door open, and a note on the table in handwriting that trembled slightly. Gone to face the council. Alone. Do not follow. This is my choice to make. He followed anyway. The final council session had convened early, hour 44 instead of 48, and Marcus arrived to find Elira standing before the assembled delegates, looking like she had not slept. She probably had not. Kellen stood to one side, resigned. Ambassador Dreth sat in the front row, satisfaction barely concealed. I am here to formally withdraw from the Light Project, Elira announced, her voice carrying the hollow precision of someone who had made a terrible decision and chosen to own it anyway. I cannot complete the test. I cannot produce the emotional responses required. My continued participation only delays the inevitable. Shut it down. Shut it all down and spare everyone further time. The council murmured approval. Dreth looked vindicated. Kellen looked heartbroken. Marcus did not remember deciding to move, but suddenly he was walking forward, past the security checkpoint, straight into the council floor where unauthorized personnel absolutely were not allowed. No, he said loudly enough to stop Elira mid-withdrawal. No, you do not get to martyr yourself to save me from association with failure. That is not how this works. Security moved to remove him, but Kellen raised a hand. Let him speak. At this point, what do we have to lose? Marcus turned to face the council, then turned back to Elira, because really, she was the only one who mattered. You stood in that chamber and tried to force yourself to laugh, and you could not, because laughter is not something you can command. It is not a protocol, it is not a diplomatic procedure. It is something that happens when you forget to protect yourself for just 1 second. I cannot forget, Elira said, her voice breaking slightly. I was trained too well. I remember the training every time I start to feel something real. Then stop trying to forget, Marcus replied. Stop trying to undo 30 years of conditioning in 3 days. That is not what the test is asking. He looked around at the assembled species, meeting eyes that ranged from curious to hostile. The pre-constructors left these tests for mature civilizations. Everyone assumed that meant civilizations that had evolved past messy emotions. But that is not it at all. Mature civilizations are the ones that can look at their own damage and choose to work with it instead of pretending it does not exist. He moved closer to Elira, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of impossible choices. You cannot laugh right now because your family disowned you for laughing. Because your entire culture taught you that showing joy was weakness. Because you are angry and hurt and grieving everything you were told you had to be. And you know what? That is the most honest I have seen you. That is more real than any forced laughter could ever be. Dreth stood abruptly. This is absurd. The test requires shared joy. You have admitted she cannot provide it. You are wasting everyone's time with emotional displays that prove exactly why humans should not be part of this process. Marcus finally looked at the Diel ambassador directly. You want to know why we passed the initial test? It was not because we were joyful. It was because I hurt myself doing something stupid. And instead of pretending I had not, I made a joke about it. I was honest about my pain, and she laughed because the honesty was unexpected and real. That is what activated the lights. Authentic human messiness meeting authentic Althari surprise. He turned back to Elira. I spent 5 years hiding from my failure, pretending I was fine being small and safe, lying to myself that I did not care about important questions anymore. And then I dropped a box on my foot in front of you and made a stupid joke. And for 1 second, I let you see me exactly as pathetic as I actually felt. She laughed at the honesty, not the joke. I did, Elira said softly, something shifting in her expression. The pre-constructors were not testing for happiness, Marcus continued. They were testing for vulnerability, for the ability to be genuinely yourself with someone completely different, and trust that they will not destroy you for it. You are vulnerable right now. You are letting an entire galactic council see you angry and broken and grieving. That is brave. That is mature. That is exactly what this test was designed to measure. Orion 7's voice filled the chamber. Correlation detected. Light activity has remained stable throughout this interaction. Current emotional honesty registers as authentic partnership demonstration. The test does not require joy. The test requires truth. Illyra stared at Marcus, tears running freely now, no longer trying to maintain diplomatic composure. "You stayed," she said, "outside my door, all night. I told you not to follow, and you followed anyway." "Of course I did," Marcus replied. "We are partners. That means I show up even when you tell me to leave, especially then. It means I see you at your worst and I stay anyway because your worst is still worth staying for." Something in Illyra broke free then, not the forced performance from the day before, but something genuine rising through the cracks of her carefully maintained walls. A sound that was half laugh, half sob, completely authentic, escaped her throat. "You're impossible," she said. "You are absolutely impossible, and I do not know how to categorize you in any diplomatic framework, and it is the most frustrating and wonderful thing I have ever experienced." Marcus felt his own laugh bubbling up, rusty and surprised. "Good. Stop trying to categorize me. Stop trying to make this fit into frameworks. Just be here. Be angry at your family. Be sad about your career. Be whatever you actually are, and trust that I am not going anywhere." In the chamber below them, the lights erupted in a pulse of golden blue radiance that lit up every monitor in the council room. Orion 7 spoke with something that sounded remarkably like triumph. "Test Phase 2 complete. Sustained authentic partnership demonstrated through adversity. Partners have proven ability to remain connected during emotional distress. Network access, escalating to final confirmation stage." The council chamber exploded into debate, but Marcus and Illyra stood in their small island of connection, laughing and crying, and finally being exactly as broken and real as they needed to be. Ambassador Dreth looked stunned. "This is not how the test was supposed to work." "With respect," Kellen said, a small smile appearing on his exhausted face. "Maybe that is exactly how the test was supposed to work. Maybe the pre-constructors knew that the species mature enough to access their network would be the ones who could be honest about their damage, who could look at their cultural failings and personal traumas and choose connection anyway." The final vote came quickly. Permission to attempt complete activation. Unanimous. Even Dreth abstained, rather than voting against the evidence displayed before him. Marcus and Illyra walked toward the chamber together, neither laughing nor crying now, just present with each other in a way that felt like coming home after a very long journey. The universe, it seemed, did not ask for perfection, it just asked for honesty, and two broken people had somehow managed to provide exactly that. The Chamber of Ancient Lights had never been designed for an audience, but 40 species watched anyway through every available monitor and holographic projection as Marcus and Illyra entered together. The crystalline rings pulsed with anticipation, golden blue light reflecting off surfaces that had waited 7 centuries for this exact moment. Orion 7 provided final instructions with uncharacteristic gentleness. Previous patterns suggest full activation requires sustained authentic emotional exchange in direct proximity to the light core. Translation: be yourselves. Additional note: the entire galaxy is watching. Try not to think about that. Thanks for the pressure, Marcus muttered, but he smiled despite himself. Illyra caught the smile and returned it, tentative but real. They stood at the chamber's center, surrounded by technology older than human civilization, and suddenly the absurdity of the situation hit Marcus like a physical force. "We are standing in a maturity test left by godlike aliens," he said, "and we got here because I dropped a box on my foot." "And I laughed at your pain," Illyra added. And then we spent 3 days having emotional breakdowns and arguing with space diplomats. If this is maturity, the universe has a very strange definition of the word. Maybe that is the point, Marcus replied. Maybe maturity is not about being dignified. Maybe it is about being ridiculous and honest at the same time. Elira looked at him. Really looked, seeing the maintenance worker with a doctorate who had hidden from his potential for 5 years. Seeing the man who had stayed outside her door all night just to prove she was not alone. If we fail, she said softly, at least we fail together. If we succeed as absolutely the wrong people for this. Either way, I am grateful it was you. That should not have been funny, but it was. The tension, the stakes, the sheer impossibility of 2 broken people trying to save humanity's chance at ancient knowledge by being authentic in front of billions of viewers. Marcus started laughing. Not at Elira, but at the situation, at fate, at the universe's apparent sense of humor. We are the worst candidates, he managed between laughs. I have spent 5 years hiding in maintenance closets. You were trained to never show emotion, and somehow we are the ones who got the lights to turn on. Elira started laughing too, her careful Althari composure finally breaking completely. My diplomatic instructors would be horrified. This is every single thing they taught me not to do. She laughed harder. I am having an emotional breakdown in front of the Galactic Council, and it is the freest I have felt in 30 years. The lights responded immediately. Not gradually, not tentatively, but in a cascading explosion of radiance that filled the chamber with light complex enough to make Orion 7 pause in its data collection simply to witness. The crystalline rings activated in sequence, each one adding layers to patterns that formed constellations across the ceiling, walls, floor, everywhere at once. Marcus and Elira stood at the center of it, laughing together, honest and imperfect, and exactly what the test had been waiting for. A form began to materialize in the light around them, an abstract figure that shifted between resembling Marcus, then Elira, then something that was both and neither. When it spoke, the voice resonated in harmonics that felt like they bypassed ears entirely and spoke directly to understanding. Confirmation. 2 minds. Different origins. Same truth. Partnership verified through adversity, vulnerability, and sustained, authentic connection. Maturity demonstrated not through perfection, but through honesty in imperfection. Welcome to the network of co-authors. The light figure gestured, and suddenly Marcus and Elira could see layers of data unfurling around them. Star maps, technology blueprints, cultural archives, records of 47 other partnerships that had passed this test across thousands of years. Every successful pair had looked wrong for the task. Every successful pair had been broken in some way that made them honest enough to matter. You are not chosen, the figure continued. You are mature enough to choose yourselves. The network requires not dominance, but partnership. Not strength, but truth. Not control, but connection. Access granted to humanity and Althari as co-equal partners in knowledge. Ambassador Dreth's voice came through the observation room speakers, shocked into honesty. They did it. They actually passed. Kellen's response carried wonder. They passed because they stopped trying to pass. They passed because they were the most authentic humans, and Althari possible, not the most impressive ones. The light figure began to fade, but not before adding one final message. Warning. Network access is conditional on continued partnership integrity. The test never truly ends. Maturity is not a destination but a practice. Continue choosing truth. Continue building bridges. The network watches and rewards those who grow. Then the overwhelming radiance subsided to a steady glow, and Marcus and Elira stood alone again, hands somehow clasped together, though neither remembered reaching for the other. The chamber's lights pulsed with a gentler rhythm now, like a heartbeat, steady and patient and welcoming. Orion 7 began processing the flood of data, already cataloging technologies that would take decades to fully understand. Preliminary analysis suggests access to pre-constructor propulsion systems, medical advances, cultural exchange protocols, and 47 partnership case studies that can serve as templates for future collaborations. Humanity has been granted the greatest knowledge transfer in recorded history, and we got it by being a mess, Marcus said, still slightly dazed. By failing publicly. By being so broken that we could not pretend anymore. Elira squeezed his hand. We got it by being partners. By choosing each other over fear. By laughing when we probably should have been professional. She looked around at the chamber, at the monitoring equipment, at the countless eyes watching from every corner of the galaxy. Every species that tried to pass this test with dignity failed. We passed it with absurdity. Maybe that says something about what the pre-constructors actually valued. The council chamber erupted in debate above them, species arguing about implications and access rights and political ramifications. But Marcus and Elira stood in their small circle of light, exhausted and triumphant, and thoroughly unsuited for the importance they had somehow achieved. You know what the strangest part is? Marcus said. I spent 5 years thinking I was done doing important things, that my one chance had passed, and then I met you, and you laughed at my pain, and somehow that became the most important thing I ever did. Elira smiled, not her diplomatic smile, but the real one that still surprised her when it appeared. I spent 30 years learning to be perfect, and then I met you, and you made me laugh when I was not supposed to, and that imperfect moment opened the universe. She paused. I think I prefer imperfect. The lights pulsed their agreement. And across the galaxy, 47 ancient test sites began broadcasting their availability, waiting for other species to find their own partnerships, their own authenticity, their own courage to be broken and honest together. The test was complete. The real work was just beginning, and two people who had learned to be small had somehow become the bridge through which humanity stepped into a larger universe, not through conquest or brilliance, but through the simple, terrifying act of being genuinely themselves with someone completely different. The pre-constructors had been right. Maturity did not mean having all the answers. It meant being brave enough to admit you did not, and choosing connection anyway. 3 months after activation, the Confluent Archive had transformed from a quiet research facility into something resembling a diplomatic hub, cultural center, and partnership laboratory all at once. Marcus walked through corridors that now bustled with activity, nodding to species he had only read about in textbooks, all of them here because two people had laughed together at the wrong moment in exactly the right way. Dr. Kellen had made his own transformation, shedding the paranoid protectiveness that had defined his directorship. He stood now in the central atrium giving an interview to a Vrex journalist, explaining with surprising ease how fear of human contamination had nearly cost Earth its greatest opportunity. I wanted to shut it all down, Kellen admitted, his voice carrying through the space. I was so afraid that humans would ruin our reputation, make us look chaotic and unreliable. But Marcus and Elira proved that our chaos, our emotional mess, our inability to be perfectly controlled, that is not a bug. That is a feature. That is what opened a door that had been closed for 700 years. Marcus smiled at the honesty, remembering the terrified director who had wanted to expel him from Earth entirely. People changed. Systems changed. The universe apparently rewarded that kind of growth. He found Elira in what used to be her cataloging station, now converted into a partnership coordination center. She worked alongside Orion 7, guiding two nervous beings through their own attempt at a light activation. One looked vaguely feline, the other resembled mobile crystal formations. They stood awkwardly near each other, trying to manufacture the kind of connection that Marcus and Elira had stumbled into by accident. You cannot force it, Elira was telling them gently, and Marcus heard the echo of his own words from months ago. The test measures authenticity. If you try too hard to seem connected, you are performing connection. You have to actually be willing to be vulnerable with each other. to look stupid, to fail publicly and laugh about it anyway. But how do we know when we are ready? The crystalline being asked, their voice like wind chimes. How did you know? We did not, Marcus answered, moving to stand beside Elira. We were two broken people avoiding our own lives who happened to be in the same room when something absurd happened. I hurt myself. She laughed. The lights noticed we were honest. That is the entire secret. Stop trying to be ready. Just be yourselves, even if yourselves are a mess. The two beings exchanged glances, something shifting in their body language that suggested possibility rather than performance. They left to attempt their test, and Marcus watched them go with a strange mixture of hope and recognition. Every partnership would be different. Every activation would follow its own path. But they all started with the same leap of faith, choosing honesty over safety. Elira leaned against him slightly, a casual intimacy they had earned through shared crisis. My family sent another message yesterday, she said quietly. Half of them still refuse to speak to me. The other half want to know if I can teach them how to laugh again. Apparently, seeing me succeed by breaking every rule they taught me has caused what my mother calls a cultural reckoning. Marcus put an arm around her shoulders. Change is uncomfortable. Your people spent generations building emotional control. You proved in front of the galaxy that control is not the same as maturity. That is going to take time to process. I know, Elira replied, but at least they are processing. At least the conversation is happening. She smiled. The pre-constructors did not just test species. They tested entire cultures. And sometimes cultures need to see what they have been missing before they can change. Speaking of change, Marcus said, pulling up a holographic display. Orion 7 has been tracking activation attempts at other light sites. Since we succeeded, there have been 43 new attempts, 7 successful activations so far. The network is waking up. 7 more partnerships, Elira said wonderingly. 7 more pairs of broken, honest people choosing connection over fear. That is more successful activations in 3 months than in the previous 3 centuries. The data suggests humanity's success has inspired broader attempts, Orion 7 added, appearing as a holographic presence. Your partnership demonstrated that perfection is not the requirement. Other species are now attempting the test with more authentic approaches. Success rate has increased from 0.02% to 14%. Statistical analysis indicates cultural shift in galactic approach to vulnerability. Marcus laughed. We accidentally started a revolution by being a disaster. There is some kind of poetic justice in that. They moved to the roof of the archive as evening fell over Seattle, the city lights spreading below them like constellations mirroring the ones in the chamber. Elira had taken to joining him here on quiet nights, both of them needing space from the constant activity below. Time to remember they were people before they were symbols. Do you think there are more out there? Marcus asked, looking at the stars. More light chambers waiting? More species that need someone to show them how to fail beautifully? I hope so, Elira replied. The universe needs more honest idiots, more people brave enough to look ridiculous, more cultures willing to admit they built walls around the best parts of themselves. Marcus considered that, thought about the maintenance worker he had been and the partnership coordinator he had become, thought about Elira, trained for diplomatic perfection, now teaching vulnerability to species who had spent centuries avoiding it. You know what the best part is? He said finally. The pre-constructors left these tests everywhere, which means they believed the galaxy was full of species worth saving, worth waiting for. They had faith that eventually someone would be brave enough to be genuine. And they were right, Elira finished. They waited 700 years, but they were right. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the archive lights below. Do you ever regret it? Dropping that box? Making that stupid joke? Everything that came after? Marcus thought about the question seriously, about the fear and the pressure and the public vulnerability that had defined the past 3 months. Never, he said. Not once. Because you laughed, and it was the first time in 5 years I felt like I was allowed to be human instead of just a collection of mistakes. That was worth everything that followed. Good, Elira said, because I am planning to keep laughing. At you, with you, probably at inappropriate times during important meetings. The galaxy will just have to deal with it. They stood together as night deepened. Two people who had learned that the universe did not want perfection. It wanted truth. It wanted courage. It wanted beings broken enough to be honest, brave enough to be vulnerable, and stubborn enough to choose connection even when connection looked like chaos. 10 years later, Marcus and Elira would stand in this same spot, watching new partnership coordinators guide their 200th successful light activation. They would train others in the art of authentic vulnerability, teach species how to unlearn control, how to embrace the beautiful mess of genuine connection, and when a young pair would ask them, terrified and hopeful, "What if we cannot laugh? What if we are not ready?" Elira would smile and say what Marcus had once said to her. "Then it is not time yet, but when it is, it will be the easiest and scariest thing you ever do. It will feel like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time, and it will be worth everything." The pre-constructors had left their test sites across the galaxy, not as barriers but as invitations, not as filters but as mirrors, reflecting back what each species most needed to see about themselves. For humans, that mirror showed chaos that could be channeled into connection. For Althari, it showed that control could coexist with authenticity. And for the galaxy, it showed that maturity was not the absence of messiness. It was the courage to be messy together, to build bridges across differences not by pretending those differences did not exist, but by laughing at them, learning from them, choosing them deliberately over and over again. In the end, humanity did not earn its place in the pre-constructor network through brilliance or strength or diplomatic skill. Earth earned its place because a maintenance worker dropped a box on his foot, made a stupid joke, and a woman who had been taught never to laugh decided, just for one perfect moment, to break every rule she had ever learned. The universe noticed, the universe approved, and the echoes of that one honest laugh rippled across star systems, waking ancient tests, inspiring new partnerships, reminding every species that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was admit you were terrified and choose connection anyway. Marcus and Elira, standing on their archive rooftop, looking at stars that held more light chambers, more chances, more species waiting to discover that they too could be broken and worthy at the same time, understood something the pre-constructors had known all along. The universe did not choose the perfect. It chose the honest. And then it gave them everything. Somewhere in the chamber below, the lights pulsed steadily, a heartbeat connecting Earth to 47 other worlds where partnerships had succeeded, where beings had chosen vulnerability over safety, where laughter had opened doors that force never could. The network grew stronger with each new connection, each new pair of unlikely partners who proved that the galaxy was not made of separate species trying to coexist. It was made of beings learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to laugh together. And that, the lights seemed to say, was the most mature thing of all. In the end, the ancient lights didn't choose humanity because we were brilliant, disciplined, or cosmically dignified. They chose us because two imperfect people finally stopped pretending, because the universe, it seems, trusts honesty far more than composure. And maybe maturity is just the moment we understand that vulnerability is not a flaw, but a doorway. So let me ask you, what part of yourself have you been hiding, convinced the world wouldn't accept it? And who in your life has seen your chaos and stayed anyway? If the universe judged you not by perfection, but by honesty, what truth would you dare to show? If you reached this far, you're already part of this strange little constellation we're building together. So type bridge in the comments. Our word anchor for tonight. Porque é isso que Marcus e Elira se tornaram. Uma ponte entre espécies, entre verdades, entre versões quebradas de nós mesmos. Tell us your city, so we know where in the galaxy you're watching from. Subscribe if you want to walk these star roads with us, Hit like to boost this story through the algorithmic nebula. Share the video so outros humanos possam rir, chorar e talvez despertar alguma luz antiga dentro deles também. And don't forget to watch the next episode appearing now on your screen. The universe isn't done with you yet.